The rain pelted down mercilessly as Grace Vaughn stood alone at the Dry Creek train station, her soaked traveling dress clinging to her trembling form. The promise of marriage that had brought her all the way from Boston to this remote Colorado town in 1878 had evaporated like morning mist under the harsh western sun. There was no groom waiting, no new life beginning, only abandonment and the cruel April downpour soaking through to her bones. "Excuse me, madam," the station master called from the shelter of the doorway. "We're closing up now, train's gone, and there won't be another for 3 days. You got somewhere to go." Grace clutched her sodden letter in one hand, the ink now bleeding into illegibility, and her small carpet bag in the other. I was supposed to meet someone, Mr. Edwin Parker." Her voice quavered with the effort of maintaining composure. "He arranged for me to come as his bride." The station master's weathered face creased with sympathy. "Parker, that no good," he stopped himself. "Madam, I'm sorry to tell you, but Ed Parker lit out of here 2 weeks ago. Word is he found gold in the Black Hills and couldn't wait for a wife to slow him down." Grace felt her knees weaken. 22 years old, and she had gambled everything, her savings, her reputation, her future on the promises of a man she'd never met. The station master was still talking, something about the hotel in town, but his words faded beneath the roaring in her ears. "I haven't any money for a hotel," she admitted, pride crumbling. "I spent everything I had on the train ticket." Just then, the sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the rain. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the curtain of water, the brim of his hat pulled low against the downpour. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, snorted and stamped as the rider pulled to a stop. "Bill, you got that package for me." The man's voice was deep, with the unhurried cadence of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "Right here, Zane," the station master replied, disappearing inside before returning with a brown paper parcel. "Got yourself some company too. Miss here was meant to marry Ed Parker." The rider Zane tilted his hat back slightly, revealing a face bronzed by sun and wind. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, assessed Grace with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Parker's not coming back," he said simply. "So I've been told," Grace replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. The rain intensified, drumming against the station roof with renewed vigor. Zane tucked the package into his saddlebag, then looked back at Grace, noticing how she shivered in her drenched clothing. "My ranch is 5 miles west," he said after a moment's consideration. "You can dry off there, get warm, figure out your next move without drowning in the meantime." Grace hesitated. Accepting the invitation of a strange man was precisely the sort of reckless behavior her mother had warned against. Yet what choice did she have? "I don't want to impose," she began, even as another violent shiver racked her frame. "Miss Vaughn, Grace Vaughn." "Miss Vaughn, this storm's not letting up anytime soon, and Dry Creek ain't exactly brimming with options for a lady in your situation." He extended a gloved hand. "Zane Tucker, I run the Broken Arrow Ranch. You have my word as a gentleman that you'll come to no harm under my roof." There was something in his steady gaze that compelled trust, or perhaps it was simply that Grace had nowhere else to turn. Either way, she found herself nodding. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker." He dismounted in one fluid motion, surprisingly graceful for a man of his size. "Can you ride?" "A little," she admitted, "though it's been years." Zane secured her carpet bag to the saddle, then helped her mount before swinging up behind her. His presence at her back was solid and warm, a stark contrast to the cold rain. He kept a respectful distance, holding the reins on either side of her without pressing close. "Hold tight to the saddle horn," he instructed, and then they were moving, the horses' hooves splashing through puddles as they left the station behind. The journey passed in rain-soaked silence. Grace was acutely aware of Zane's presence, the subtle scent of leather and pine, the careful way he guided the horse around treacherous spots in the trail. By the time a small cabin came into view, nestled against a backdrop of pines with smoke curling from the chimney, Grace was so cold she could barely feel her fingers. "This isn't the main house," Zane explained as he helped her dismount. "Just my hunting cabin. Closer than the ranch proper, and you look like you need warming up sooner rather than later." The cabin's interior was simple but tidy: a stone fireplace with a crackling fire, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a curtained-off area that presumably contained a bed, and a collection of practical furnishings that spoke of a man who valued function over ornamentation. "Let me see to the horse, then I'll fix you something hot to drink," Zane said, guiding her to a chair near the fire. "There's a blanket there. You should get out of those wet clothes." Grace's eyes widened in alarm, and he quickly added, "I'll stay outside until you're decent." "There's a shirt and trousers behind that curtain. They'll be too big, but they're dry." True to his word, Zane disappeared outside with his horse. Grace peeled off her sodden dress, petticoats, and corset with trembling fingers, hanging them on a rack near the fire to dry. The borrowed clothing, a soft flannel shirt that reached nearly to her knees and trousers she had to roll up multiple times, swallowed her slender frame, but the relief of dry fabric against her skin was immeasurable. "You decent?" Zane's voice called from outside. "Yes," she answered, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders and settling back by the fire. He entered, shedding his damp coat and hat by the door. With his hat removed, she could see his face clearly for the first time, strong features framed by dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own domain, setting a kettle to boil and gathering cups from a shelf. "Thank you," Grace said, breaking the silence. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Zane glanced at her, those storm-gray eyes softening slightly. "No need for thanks. Couldn't leave you standing there in the rain." He paused, measuring coffee into a pot. "I'm sorry about Parker. Man never could stick to anything. You know him. This is cattle country. Everyone knows everyone, more or less." The kettle whistled, and he poured the boiling water over the coffee grounds. Parker was always chasing the next big strike. Not the sort to settle down, despite what he might have told you. Grace felt the tears she'd been holding back begin to well up. "I should have known better. It all seemed too good to be true, his letters, his promises." She brushed angrily at a tear that escaped. "I just wanted to start fresh. My parents died last year, and there was nothing left for me in Boston." Zane handed her a steaming cup, then sat in the chair opposite, giving her space to compose herself. "Starting fresh is why most of us came west," he said quietly. "Nothing wrong with wanting that." The coffee was strong and bitter, but it warmed her from the inside out. Outside, the rain continued to drum against the roof, but inside the cabin, Grace felt the first tentative stirrings of safety. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, eager to focus on something other than her predicament. A subtle change came over Zane's face, a softening around the eyes, a hint of pride in the set of his jaw. "Broken Arrow's been mine for 6 years now. Started with 50 acres and a dozen head of cattle. Now I've got 2,000 acres and a herd of 300. You built it yourself." He nodded. "Every fence post, every corral. Got a proper house now too, though I still use this cabin when I'm working this section of the property." He took a sip of his coffee. "What about you? What were you hoping to find out here in Colorado?" "A home," Grace answered simply. "Somewhere to belong." She looked down at her cup. "Foolish, I suppose." "Not foolish," Zane countered. "Brave. Takes courage to leave everything familiar behind." They lapsed into comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the persistent rain. Grace found her eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of the day's emotional turmoil catching up with her. "You should rest," Zane said, noticing her fatigue. "Take the bed, I'll sleep out here." Too tired to argue, Grace retreated behind the curtain. The bed was narrow but clean, with a patchwork quilt that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. Despite her uncertain future, she fell asleep almost instantly. She awoke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the aroma of something cooking. For a moment she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. "Morning," Zane called from the other side of the curtain. "There's water for washing in the basin if you'd like." "Your dress is dry, but it might be more comfortable to keep wearing those clothes for now." Grace used the cold water to freshen up as best she could, then emerged to find Zane at the stove, frying bacon and eggs. He looked up when she appeared, and for a fleeting moment, something passed across his face, an expression Grace couldn't quite decipher. "Sleep well?" he asked, turning his attention back to the food. "Better than I expected," she admitted, taking a seat at the table. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Tucker." "Zane," he corrected, setting a plate in front of her. "Mr. Tucker was my father." They ate in companionable silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world of vibrant greens and blues. Through the cabin window, Grace could see rolling hills dotted with wildflowers, and in the distance, the peaks of mountains still capped with snow. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. Zane followed her gaze. "That it is, never gets old, that view. What will I do now?" The question slipped out unbidden, her momentary peace shattered by the reality of her situation. Zane considered her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Town's got a hotel. I can pay for a room for you until the next train." "I can't accept that," Grace protested. "Then work for it," he suggested. "Hotel owners always looking for help, or—" He hesitated, then continued, "Broken Arrow could use a housekeeper. Main house needs a woman's touch, truth be told. Been just me and my foreman trying to keep it in order, and we're not much good at it." Hope flickered in Grace's chest. "You'd hire me, you don't even know me." "I'm a fair judge of character," Zane replied, "and you need a job, seems simple enough." "I accept," Grace said quickly before he could change his mind. "I'm a hard worker and I can cook and clean," and Zane held up a hand, a hint of a smile softening his rugged features. "No need to convince me. Job's yours if you want it." After breakfast, they rode to the main house, a substantial log structure set on a gentle rise overlooking a valley where cattle grazed. As Zane had hinted, the interior of the house, while solidly built, showed the neglect of a place inhabited solely by men with little time or inclination for domestic matters. "It's not much to look at now," Zane acknowledged, watching Grace take in the dusty furniture and bare walls. "But it's got good bones." "It has potential," Grace agreed, already mentally rearranging the sparse furnishings and planning where curtains might brighten the rooms. Zane showed her to a small bedroom off the kitchen. "This was meant for a housekeeper. Never got around to hiring one till now." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. "I'll leave you to get settled. Need to check on the herd." Left alone, Grace sat on the narrow bed, overwhelmed by the swift turn of events. Yesterday, she had been a bride-to-be, full of hope for a new life with Edwin Parker. Today, she was the housekeeper for a rancher she barely knew. It wasn't the future she had imagined, but it was a future nonetheless. Over the next few weeks, Grace threw herself into transforming the Broken Arrow ranch house. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, mended linens, and cooked meals that made Zane and his foreman, a taciturn man named Henry, look forward to coming in from their long days on the range. Zane proved to be a fair employer and increasingly a friend. He brought her wildflowers he found while riding the range, carved a bookshelf for the growing collection of books he ordered from Denver, and listened attentively when she spoke of her life in Boston. In turn, Grace learned about his journey west after the Civil War, how he'd worked as a cowhand until he saved enough to buy his own land, and his dreams of expanding the Broken Arrow into one of the most successful ranches in Colorado. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Zane turned to her with an uncharacteristically serious expression. "You've made a real difference here, Grace." She smiled, pleased by the compliment. "I enjoy the work." "It's more than the work," he said quietly. "Place feels like a home now, hasn't felt that way since, well, ever, I suppose." Something in his tone made Grace's heart quicken. She had been fighting and growing attraction to Zane, telling herself it was merely gratitude and admiration. But in moments like this, when his guard lowered and she glimpsed the man beneath the stoic rancher exterior, it became increasingly difficult to deny her feelings. "I'm glad," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Grace thought he might say more, might acknowledge the unspoken connection that had been building between them. Instead, he cleared his throat and stood. "Getting late. I should turn in." Grace nodded, tamping down her disappointment. "Good night, Zane." As spring gave way to summer, the ranch grew busier. Cattle needed moving to higher pastures, fences required mending after winter damage, and preparations began for the fall roundup. Grace's days were filled with cooking for hungry cowhands, preserving the bounty from the small kitchen garden she'd planted, and continuing her efforts to make the ranch house a true home. She also began to venture into Dry Creek occasionally, making friends with the shopkeepers and townspeople. To her surprise, she found herself becoming part of the community, invited to socials at the church, consulted on the establishment of a small lending library, welcomed as though she had always belonged. It was after one such trip to town, a warm July afternoon when Grace had stayed longer than intended helping organize a box social for the church, that she returned to find Zane waiting anxiously on the porch. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his usual composure absent. "It's nearly dark." Grace blinked in surprise at his tone. "I was helping Mrs. Hollies with the church social. I told Henry I'd be late." "Henry didn't tell me," Zane said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I thought, when you weren't here, understanding dawned, you were worried about me." "Of course I was worried," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "When I couldn't find you, I thought maybe you'd left, gone back east." The vulnerability in his admission caught Grace off guard. "I wouldn't leave without saying goodbye," she said softly. "But why would you think I'd go at all?" "I'm happy here." Zane looked away, his profile sharp against the fading light. "People leave, Grace. That's just how it is out here. No reason you'd be different." She took a step closer to him, gathering her courage. "What if I want to be different? What if I want to stay?" He turned back to her, his eyes searching her face. "As my housekeeper, if that's all you want me to be," she answered, her heart pounding. For a long moment he was silent, and Grace feared she had misread everything, the lingering glances, the small kindnesses, the way his eyes followed her across a room. Then, with a suddenness that took her breath away, he closed the distance between them. "I want a hell of a lot more than that, Grace Vaughn," he said, his voice low and intense. "I want to wake up to your smile every morning. I want to build something with you that lasts. I want—" He stopped, as if overwhelmed by the force of his own feelings. Grace reached up, touching his face with trembling fingers. "Then ask me." Zane caught her hand in his, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers up her spine. "I'm not Edwin Parker. I can't write pretty letters with fancy promises. All I have is this land, this life. It's hard work and long days, but it's real, and I'd share every bit of it with you if you'd have me. Are you asking me to marry you, Zane Tucker?" His smile, rare and transformative, lit his entire face. "I believe I am." "Then my answer is yes," Grace whispered, just before his lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of longing finally fulfilled. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Dry Creek, with the entire town turning out to witness the union of the serious rancher and the Eastern lady who had captured his heart. The reception at the Broken Arrow lasted well into the night, with music and dancing under stars that seemed to Grace to shine more brilliantly than they ever had in Boston. When the last guest had departed and they were finally alone in the house that had become their home, Zane took Grace's hands in his. "When I found you at that train station, soaked to the skin and looking like a half-drowned kitten, I never imagined." He shook his head, emotion making his voice rough. "That you'd end up married to that kitten," Grace teased gently. "That I'd find the other half of myself," he corrected, drawing her close. "I love you, Grace Tucker." The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. "And I love you, Zane Tucker." As summer turned to fall, the Broken Arrow prospered. The cattle fetched good prices at market, allowing Zane to purchase additional breeding stock and hire more hands. Grace, meanwhile, transformed the ranch house into a place of warmth and comfort. Hanging curtains she sewed herself, planting flower beds around the porch, and filling the once bare walls with paintings and photographs. But the greatest transformation was in Zane himself. The taciturn rancher who had once limited his conversations to the essential now spoke freely of his hopes and dreams, laughed more readily, and showed his affection for Grace without reserve. To the amusement of his cowhands, He took to bringing her wildflowers whenever he rode the range, and no decision about the ranch was made without seeking her opinion. In late September, as they sat on their porch watching the aspens turn gold in the distance, Grace took Zane's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "I have news," she said, her eyes shining with joy. Zane's expression transformed from confusion to wonder as understanding dawned. "A baby." "We're having a baby," Grace nodded, laughing as he swept her into an embrace that lifted her feet off the ground. "Careful, I'm in a delicate condition, remember?" He set her down immediately, his face a mixture of concern and elation. How long have you known? Are you feeling well?" "Should you be resting?" "Spring," she answered, amused by his barrage of questions. "Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday when I was in town, and yes, I feel perfectly fine." Zane knelt before her, pressing a reverent kiss to her still flat stomach. "A family," he murmured, "our family." That winter was the happiest of Grace's life. As snow blanketed the ranch in pristine white, she and Zane spent cozy evenings planning for their child's arrival. They converted a small room adjacent to their bedroom into a nursery, with Zane crafting a cradle from pine wood and Grace sewing tiny garments in anticipation. On a bright April morning, almost exactly a year after Grace had arrived at Dry Creek Station, their daughter was born, a robust baby girl with her mother's golden hair and her father's storm-gray eyes. They named her Hope, for what she represented to them both. "She's perfect," Zane whispered, cradling his daughter with hands that seemed too large and rough for such a delicate task, yet held her with infinite tenderness. Grace watched them, her heart so full it felt it might burst. "She is," she agreed, "and so is this life we've built." Zane looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I used to think I was building something worthwhile with this ranch. Now I know the ranch was just preparing me for what really matters." He leaned down to kiss Grace's forehead. "Thank you for giving me a home, Grace Tucker." As Hope grew, so did the broken arrow. By the time she was taking her first tottering steps, the ranch had doubled in size, with Zane's careful management and Grace's keen business sense proving a formidable combination. They added rooms to the house, including a proper library filled with books for their daughter to explore as she grew. 2 years after Hope's birth, Grace gave birth to twin boys, strong, rambunctious infants who kept their parents busy from sunup to sundown. Zane doted on all 3 children, taking Hope on rides around the property perched in front of him on his saddle, teaching the boys to fish in the creek that ran through their land, and regaling them with stories of his early days as a cowhand. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Zane surprised Grace with a trip to Denver, their first real vacation since their marriage. As they strolled arm in arm through the city streets, admiring the fashionable shops and grand buildings, Grace found herself reflecting on the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. "Penny for your thoughts," Zane said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about Edwin Parker," she admitted. Zane raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly what a man hopes his wife is thinking about on their anniversary," Grace laughed, squeezing his arm. "Not like that. I was thinking that if he hadn't abandoned me, if he had been waiting at that station as promised, I never would have met you. I never would have found this life that I love so much." Zane pulled her close, oblivious to the curious glances of passers-by. "Then I owe the man a debt, though I'd still like to punch him for leaving you standing in the rain." "My gallant defender," Grace teased. Then, more seriously, "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't come to the station that day?" "No," Zane answered without hesitation. "Because I believe we were meant to find each other, if not then, somehow, somewhere." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Some things are just meant to be, Grace Tucker." That night in their hotel room, as moonlight spilled through the window and the sounds of the city faded into the background, Grace and Zane reaffirmed the love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. And Grace knew, with a certainty that filled her soul, that the rain-soaked disappointment of 5 years ago had been not an ending, but the beginning of the greatest adventure of her life. 10 years after Grace arrived at Dry Creek Station, the Broken Arrow was one of the most prosperous ranches in Colorado. Their family had grown to include a fourth child, another daughter, born 3 years after the twins. Their home was a gathering place for friends and neighbors, known for its warmth and hospitality. On a golden autumn afternoon, Grace stood on the porch, watching Zane teach 8-year-old Hope how to throw a lasso while the twins, now 6, cheered from the corral fence, and their youngest, Elizabeth, played with her dolls at Grace's feet. The scene before her was one of such perfect contentment that she felt tears prick her eyes. Zane looked up, catching her gaze across the yard, and the smile he gave her still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. After all these years, after 4 children and countless challenges overcome together, the love between them had only deepened, growing stronger with each passing season. As the sun began to set, painting the Colorado sky in magnificent hues of gold and crimson, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place. She had come west seeking a new beginning, never imagining the happiness she would find. What had begun in rain and tears had blossomed into a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have dreamed. And it had all started with a moment of kindness, a stranger on horseback, offering shelter from the storm.